All right. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm Scott Buchanan. I'm the COO for Bitcoin Depot. And then we've also got David Gray, our CFO, on the line as well. So just want to start out at a high level talking about what Bitcoin Depot is and is not. So Bitcoin Depot operates a network of Bitcoin ATMs, which are physical kiosks that allow consumers to convert physical fiat currency into digital Bitcoin. We're an easy way for customers to convert that cash into Bitcoin. We're a federally licensed money service business, and we're licensed at the state level as a money transmitter. We proactively employ robust KYC and AML, and we've got a history of profitability over the past 9 years that we've been around as a company. We're not a vendor of security tokens. We only sell Bitcoin. We don't custody consumers' Bitcoin. We are not an exchange, a miner, or a lender, and we're not historically correlated with the price of Bitcoin. So just a high level of the leadership team. Brandon Mintz is our founder and CEO and continues to be the largest shareholder. Brandon founded the company back in 2016 after he'd previously had other ventures in cryptocurrency. We've got myself and David Gray on the call, who I've mentioned. And then we've also got the rest of the leadership team. Jason and Bill specifically came from Cardtronics, which is the largest operator of cash ATMs in the world. That's been a really helpful background as we've looked to expand our network of kiosks. And we see a lot of similarities on the physical operations side in companies like Cardtronics. So we've done over $3 billion of transaction volume in the lifetime of our company. What that means is that over $3 billion of physical US dollars have gone into our kiosks to purchase cryptocurrency. And that's over 3.8 million transactions, and we've got over 8,400 kiosks across North America. We're currently in 49 states and 10 Canadian provinces. The only state we're not in at this point is New York, which I'll talk about further on a later slide in the deck. For the trailing 12 months through Q1, we've had almost $600 million of revenue and $55 million of adjusted EBITDA. And Q1 was our record for both of those numbers. Q1 was $20 million of adjusted EBITDA. So we're continuing to see rapid growth, especially at the bottom line and in the cash flow of the business. So the business is obviously foundationally based on cash transactions. So we're not competing with Coinbase or the other online digital exchanges primarily. We're serving a niche market who's focused on cash transactions. And according to this survey data from, it's from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, 16% of cash payments, or 16% of payments are still done in cash in 2023 in the US. And 19% of US adults prefer to use cash to pay for goods. So it's still an integral part of the economy. Even as many people are shifting to all digital payments, cash is still relevant, and there's a lot of people still transacting in cash. So here's how the transaction flow works at a high level. A consumer would come up to our kiosk, like you see here on the left, and they would choose how much Bitcoin they want to buy. So let's say they want to buy $20 of Bitcoin. They would enter some identifying information, like their name, email, scan their driver's license. Then they would scan a digital wallet. They could either use our free non-custodial Bitcoin Depot wallet in our mobile app, or they can use any other wallet that they're already comfortable using. They scan the QR code at the kiosk. We run blockchain analytics to make sure that there's no criminal activity associated with the wallet. And then they insert the cash and we send the Bitcoin to their wallet. The entire transaction process just takes a minute or two. And we've got live 24/7 phone support from a customer support standpoint if they do have questions during the transaction process. So as customers continue to use the kiosk, cash continues to build up in these locations. And so as consumers put cash into the ATM, it builds up a cash balance. And we have armored truck companies going around the country to collect that cash for us. So depending on what we set pickup frequencies, armored trucks are going to come between 1 time a month to 4 times a month and collect the cash to bring it back to our bank account, which then we can use to purchase Bitcoin. And we hold Bitcoin in our digital wallet, generally about $500,000 worth. And as consumers are transacting throughout the day, we're sending Bitcoin from our inventory to the customer's wallet. And then we have an automated process who's buying additional Bitcoin from our liquidity partners to replenish our inventory. So we're taking very little first-party risk on the price of Bitcoin from our inventory standpoint. and we're turning over that inventory of Bitcoin several times a day as we're transacting with end users. So at a high level, our users from our survey data are using Bitcoin for a few main purposes. So once they purchase the Bitcoin from us, the two largest use cases, as you can see on the left here of our chart, are online purchases. So customers that are underbanked or unbanked that live a cash-based life can buy Bitcoin and use it for purchasing things online. And number two is they're using it to send money to others, like remittance, like you'd see with MoneyGram or Western Union. So customers can buy Bitcoin from us and then send it to someone domestically or abroad. You can see on the chart for age, we run the gamut of ages from 18 up to 60 plus, and it's pretty evenly spread throughout there. And then you can see we have a slightly heavier mix of male to female of our users. And here on the right-hand side, you can see our median transaction size, which has continued to grow over time. And this is largely just as customers have gotten more comfortable with the idea of a Bitcoin ATM and the transaction process. They're starting to just do larger transactions because they know that the process works and is trustworthy. So these kiosks are placed in retailers all over the country, primarily placed in convenience stores and gas stations, but we're also in malls, restaurants, grocery stores, all sorts of retail spots. And retailers like to place our kiosks in their stores for a few main reasons. The biggest of which is that we pay a predictable monthly rent amount for the space, which helps them get a good ROI on their square footage, but it also helps drive traffic to their stores. Our kiosk doesn't take up a lot of space, and we're spending marketing dollars on driving people to our Bitcoin kiosks. And this also helps the retailers as it drives people to their stores. So compliance is a key part of the business. All money service businesses or money transmitters have to take compliance seriously, and it's no different for us. We've got 19 compliance employees with over 100 years of combined compliance experience. And we take a proactive approach, really setting industry best practices as the largest Bitcoin ATM operator out there. We do a lot around Know Your Customer and AML programs to make sure that illicit activity isn't used at our kiosks. So on the left here, you can see the growth of the Bitcoin ATM footprint worldwide. So in 2025 to this point, there's 38,000 Bitcoin ATMs worldwide. The vast majority of those are in the US. Of our 8,400 kiosks we currently have, roughly 8,000 of them are in the US, with a few hundred in Canada and Australia. We think there's a lot of opportunity internationally to continue expansion, and we're really focused on that this year and going forward. And on the right-hand side, you can see just how large the Bitcoin transaction network is at this point, where currently there's more volume going through the Bitcoin network than American Express on an annual basis. On the right, you can see here our position in the market relative to our competitors. On the top with the US and the bottom on Canada, you can see especially in the US, we're the largest by a good margin. And we continue to grow that lead over our competitors as we're rapidly deploying additional kiosks. On the left, you can see the chart of our Bitcoin ATM locations in North America. And you see that obvious gap of New York State. New York State, we still have a pending application. There's currently no cash to Bitcoin ATMs in the state of New York, as the application process is very long, and we're still in that process and hope to get approval soon. And that would open up a large market for us to continue to expand. We think it could potentially support 2,000 to 3,000 Bitcoin ATMs if we just look at the population of the state relative to how many kiosks there are in other states like Florida or Texas or California. Our largest retail partner is Circle K. Circle K is the largest corporately owned gas station chain in the US. We currently have over 900 kiosks deployed in their locations as of March 2025. And we're their exclusive provider of Bitcoin in all their retail locations in North America. And this partnership's really helped us as we've expanded over the past few years because it's shown that we're kind of the gold standard of Bitcoin ATMs. Circle K chose us for their partner after an extensive RFP process. And that's really helped us as we've gone into other retailers and hope to place our kiosks there because they can see that Circle K chose us as the provider. And that's given them confidence that we're the right choice for other retailers as well. So here's a chart that shows our transaction volume in the yellow bars relative to the price of Bitcoin. And so a question we always got historically is, well, aren't you just correlated with the price of Bitcoin like most of the exchanges and miners are? And we're not. Our customers, as I mentioned earlier, are using the Bitcoin for use cases like buying things online or sending Bitcoin more so than just speculative investment. And so because of that, our customers have generally continued to use our kiosks regardless of what the price of Bitcoin's doing, which this chart can illustrate, especially in 2022 during the crypto winter when the Bitcoin price was down for an extended period of time. You can see that we continued to grow transaction volumes as we expanded our fleet and gained new customers. Here's a slide on our cohort analysis. So our kiosks, when they're deployed, they are at their lowest volumes they're ever going to do because they're just brand new and they haven't established a customer base. And then over time, the longer they're deployed, they ramp up in transaction volume. So here to illustrate that, on the left, our 2021 cohort, we installed 3,470 kiosks that year. Those kiosks in 2021 did $196 million. And then in 2024, those kiosks are now doing $300 million. And then you can see that same trend in 2022 and 2023, that the kiosks are going to continue to ramp up in volume as they establish a customer base and they're in a location for longer periods of time. So right now we have thousands of kiosks that are still in year one of their life cycle. And so we've got a lot of growth built in to those existing fleet of kiosks that will continue to see revenue growth over time. A secondary product that we offer in addition to our kiosks is called BD Checkout. BD Checkout is a mobile app-based product in our Bitcoin Depot app where consumers can go to retail locations, of which we're in over 7,000, and they can use the mobile app to generate a barcode, which can be scanned at the cash register to buy crypto. So for example, Walgreens, you could go in there, use our app and say you want to buy $100 of Bitcoin. It'll generate a barcode, and that can be scanned at the cash register. And then you'd hand the cash over to the cashier, and you'd get the Bitcoin in your mobile wallet. This is a much smaller product for us than the Bitcoin ATMs, but it's very low cost and low ongoing maintenance for us. We're in 7,000 plus locations with this, and there's no physical infrastructure required from our point of view, because we're partnered with a processor who's integrated in the POS systems here, and the barcode can just be scanned at any of those retailers, and we can send the Bitcoin and get the cash from the retailer. So it's a good way for us to expand in a low-cost way without the CapEx required from the kiosks. So here's high-level financials. You can see the growth here in Q1 revenue and EBITDA. So 2023 was 163 million. And then we saw a dip into 2024. That was driven by regulations that went into effect in California, which limited transaction volumes. And you can see the recovery we've had into 2025 as we've relocated kiosks out of California and seen the other kiosks continue to ramp up. And then on the EBITDA side, where it's especially obvious, we went from 13 to 5 to 20. And we're really seeing margin growth as we're expanding our network of kiosks and relocating underperforming kiosks to better locations. And I'll pause there and can take the questions. I think we've had some submitted so far, so I'll just start going down that list. So the first question is, I'll just read it out and then answer it for you guys. Unless Brendan, I don't know if you read the questions or if I should read them.
Yeah, Scott, I'm happy to read the questions here from the Q&A bank. Our first one here is, after a very strong first quarter and providing a positive outlook for the months ahead, during your recent earnings call, the question is around analyst estimates here, and they're showing sharp declines in EPS on a sequential basis through the year end in 2025 and only marginal increases in EPS growth for 2026. Can you provide detail on that?
Yeah, so I can't speak for the analysts on all their models, but for us, what we have always seen historically is seasonality. So Q2 is always our strongest, and we think that'll continue to be the case this year. We'll see strong revenue and EBITDA in Q2, and then we see some tapering off into Q3 and Q4, and then it picks back up again in late Q1 into Q2. And that's just the cycle we see every year. So I don't know exactly what their models have for these numbers, but I'm not surprised that EPS would decline in Q3 and Q4, and then you'd see improvement again into 2026 in Q1 and Q2.
Got it. And our second question here is, can you discuss the armored transport part of the chain? How are they compensated, and are they ultimately Bitcoin Depot employees?
Yeah, so we contract with large national armored truck carriers like Brinks, Loomis, and Garda. and they get compensated on a per pickup metric. So it's roughly 50 to $75 per pickup. But they'll collect the cash and remit it back to our bank accounts, and then we just have schedules on which they go and pick up cash at each kiosk.
Got it. And what's the average life of a kiosk?
Yeah, so the business was started in 2016, and we still have many of almost all of those kiosks operating today. So those kiosks are 9 years old at this point. We'd appreciate them over a life of 5 years, but we think they can last easily 10 plus years based on what we've seen so far in the kiosks that we have in operation.
Great. And we have a question around some of the retail or just some of the partnerships inherent in the business. You mentioned with Circle K, there was a exclusivity clause in there. Can you talk about the terms of some of those relationships and do they all require exclusivity?
Yeah, so every retailer that we operate in, we have exclusivity in those locations. And generally, if it's larger chains like Circle K, we're exclusive across the entire chain. And that's important for us, especially on an individual location basis, because we can't have a store place 5 Bitcoin ATMs from different companies next to each other. We need to be the only Bitcoin ATM in that site.
Got it. And I guess from a product perspective, what's the key differentiator there? I guess how were you able to ultimately win that RFP from Circle K?
Yeah, so Circle K RFP was 4 or 5 years ago at this point, but the big differentiator was our scale. So they believed that we could deploy a large number of kiosks effectively and our compliance program. Circle K wants to make sure that a company that they're contracting with to place hundreds of financial service products in their store has a strong compliance program that's going to do the right things and be someone they can trust with those types of services.
Got it. Maybe we could talk about the revenue profile. What's the fee structure like? How does it compare to some of the peers?
Yeah, so fees in the Bitcoin ATM space run the gamut, but typically you see an average of mid 20% margins on the spread that they're charging on the price of Bitcoin. And we're right around there as well. The pricing's different in different states based on requirements, but that's ballpark what you see. It's an expensive service because the physical infrastructure required to process these transactions, along with the compliance required in being a money transmitter in the crypto space, it's not something you're going to do for a $2 or $3 transaction fee like a cash ATM. It's a much more complex process, and that's why the margins are reflective of that expense in this industry.
Got it. That makes sense. And we have a question here on the margin profile in Q1. Can you provide some color on the big jump in margins year over year, just based off similar revenue?
Yeah, so it's largely just based on it's based on the kiosks maturing. So as we get kiosks that are more mature and the volume on an individual kiosk basis grows, the rent that we pay to the retailers is one of the biggest costs that's pretty static. And so if the volume per kiosk is growing, you can get better leverage on that rent profile. And then also comparing back to 2023, there's also some weird stuff back in 23 on the expense side that raised expenses because that's when we were going public through this de-SPAC process. So expenses just across the board were generally higher back in 23. And we've been able to get a lot of that down as we're now into 25 and just further away from that de-SPAC process.
Got it. And maybe you could talk about your capital allocation framework. How can investors think about that? Are you planning on being active on the M&A front? And what's consolidation look like in the industry?
Yeah, so we're always open to acquisitions that make sense, but we're not going to force it. So we're going to do acquisitions if they arise that make sense for us from a creative margin standpoint. So if we can find Bitcoin ATM companies that want to sell for a reasonable multiple, we'll definitely buy those and fold them into our existing fleet and grow our scale. But we're not going to overpay. So there's a lot of fragmentation in the Bitcoin ATM space. There's dozens of operators out there that we'd love to acquire, and we talk to them frequently. I think acquisitions will happen. I don't know how quickly, but the space will start consolidating with a couple of the big operators, and that'll just continue to improve our margin profile as we operate a larger network of kiosks with the kind of fixed overhead from a salary standpoint.
Got it. And I know you talked about New York, some of the regulatory changes or potential changes there. Can you share any thoughts on any other recent regulatory changes, whether it be at the federal or state level?
Yeah, so New York is the license we're still working on. I mentioned California had regulation pass and that went into effect in early 24. There's a lot of states that are looking at how to regulate Bitcoin ATMs because it's still a new and emerging space. We've got government relations team and outside lobbying firms that are focused on that and making sure we get the best outcomes possible from a regulatory standpoint. But it's something we're definitely focused on.
Great. And then are there still some conflicts of interest with one or two of your largest shareholders?
There's nothing that I know of.
Got it. And then from a geographic perspective, I'm just curious as to, how do you ultimately think about, engaging your target customer base? Is it more, do you more target urban areas, more rural areas, or, how can you kind of think about that customer acquisition
Yeah.
process?
So our marketing spend is mostly on Google AdWords. So we list all of our locations on Google and other various platforms so that people can find them. And we focus on spending on key search terms when people search things like buy Bitcoin near me, buy Bitcoin with cash, Bitcoin ATMs. And we want to be the first results that come up so that they find our locations and become one of our customers where they're much more sticky. Because once they do the KYC on our kiosks, they're going to keep coming back to Bitcoin Depot versus our competitors because they don't want to have to repeat those KYC and AML compliance processes.
Got it. That makes sense. And what would you say is the greatest limitation to your near-term growth outlook?
I don't think there's a major limitation. We've got 1,500 kiosks in inventory that we're looking to deploy. So I think we have a lot of runway for deploying new kiosks and growing our footprint. And as people have seen through our Q1 results, the margin profile is continuing to improve. So I think we've got things set up really well for growth in the rest of this year going forward.
Yeah, and how does that inventory management work exactly? Is there a typical time frame where you manufacture versus, or I guess acquire the kiosk versus ultimately deploy it?
Well, we bought a lot of kiosks in 2024, like we talked about. And so we built up an inventory because we found a lot of the good price. And so we're just working through that inventory of kiosks right now. We typically won't carry a large amount of additional kiosks. So we can buy them and get them deployed within a few months. But right now, we're just in a fortunate spot where we had a lot that were at a good price that we bought. And now we're working through that backlog of inventory to grow our fleet.
Got it. And a couple more questions here. This next one is, on the retail side, the partnership side. Are there any potential large retail RFPs in the pipeline, or do you have any, near-term expectations there?
Yeah, there's always retailers looking to add Bitcoin ATMs, and we're always in those processes. There's none that I can specifically talk about at this point because nothing's closed, but we're definitely always looking at adding additional large retailers to our network of kiosks.
Great, great. Well, Scott, that pretty much covered all the questions here. I'll pass it back over to you for any closing remarks.
I appreciate you guys joining the call, and if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me or our IR team at Gateway, and we can have follow-up conversations. Thank you guys.
Fantastic. Thanks, Scott. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.